All right, let's go ahead and proceed to the next frame. On the frame number 5, the explosion cloud will start to cool down. To show this effect, we'll use the dark gray color as a base. Also, the clouds and the particles will move a bit farther away from the center. Okay, so let's start drawing this. I'm picking the dark gray color from the background and making it a little bit lighter. This way we'll be able to distinguish it from the background layer, adding a new layer inside the frame 5 inches group and choosing the brush tool from the toolbar. Good. I'll start from the central cloud. It should become a bit smaller than on the previous frame. Yes, and this is fine. Then proceeding to the upper cloud. Then a small one on the left. Don't forget about the small particles in between. Moving to the cloud on the right. The cloud down here. Defining the next position for a particle. And lastly, drawing the large cloud on the left. Adding some new particles to make the explosion look rich and powerful. Even the tiny dots matter, adding some more. Awesome. I think the base shapes look good. So let's proceed to the highlights. Now, even though the base color on this frame is gray, we'll use the red and orange for the highlights. This will help us show that the explosion clouds, which were initially very hot, are now in the process of cooling down. I'm picking the dark orange from the previous frame and change it to the darker shade. Red is actually better. Okay, then adding a new layer and starting to draw the highlights the same way, as we did for all of the previous frames, leaving some space at the bottom of the cloud and almost no space at the top. I think I'll keep this gray area in the center. It gives some volume to the cloud. Proceeding to the small particle here at the bottom. Then this one closer to the center. And the rest of them as well. I'm skipping just the tiniest ones and drawing the highlight for all of the rest. Great, moving to the upper cloud. This frame starts to look very cartoony already. Proceed into the smaller cloud on the left. And so on, until all of the bigger clouds have these red highlights. Feel free to experiment with the brush sizes and leave some gray areas in the central parts of the clouds if you like. All right, it looks pretty good to me. Let's create another layer and add even more highlights. Picking the base orange color from the previous frame and making it a bit lighter, like so. Then turning on the visibility for the background layer and start clicking on top of the central cloud like this. Yeah, the cloud doesn't look flat anymore. A couple of clicks for the particles. And then covering the cloud on the left like so. You don't have to connect between the circles. This space in between gives the cloud more volume. Moving to the large cloud at the bottom, and so on. After I finish this layer of highlights, I'll draw 2 more layers. First, I will cover the clouds with an even lighter orange, and then we'll add some yellow dots. You're already familiar with the process. And since there is not going to be any new techniques, I'll speed up the video to save your time. Okay, I think the clouds look pretty awesome. It really looks like they're still quite hot. Yet the gray color suggests that it's not going to last for much longer. I want to do one more thing before we finish this frame. Let's find the layer of the spiky highlights in the group and drag it to the top like this. Yes, this gives the frame a whole new dimension, and the explosion looks even more powerful. Finally, let's switch off the background layer and merge the visible layers into a separate one, calling it Frame 5. Excellent. Time to draw the next frame. On the frame number 6, the spiky elements will completely disappear, so we'll start right of the explosion clouds. As always, at this stage of the explosion, the clouds will keep splitting into more parts and also become smaller. Picking the dark gray color for a base, creating a new layer, and switching to the brush tool. Okay, let's start from the cloud on the left this time and split it into 2 smaller ones. Adding some tiny particles as well. Good. Next, moving the central cloud and also splitting it into pieces. Then the cloud down here. Actually, I'll keep it in one piece for now and split it on the next frame. Defining the next positions for the particles too. Then proceeding to the cloud on the right. Let's add some details here as well. Then the cloud at the top. And closing the circle with a small cloud on the left. Let's add a few additional dots just to make the frame look more interesting. Yeah, I think that's it, and we can go ahead and draw the first layer of highlights. Now, on this frame, the explosion clouds are still cooling down, and the process is not complete yet. We need to show the progress somehow, so let's add a new layer. And pick a lighter gray color. Then let's start clicking on top of the clouds, same as we always do. You don't have to connect between the circles. I will keep filling all of the bigger clouds and particles with this light gray. Once it's done, I will add another layer of highlights using the dark red color to make the clouds look hot. This process will take me a few minutes to complete, so I'll increase the speed of the video once again. Okay, we're done with the second layer of highlights, but I feel like we can do more for this frame. Let's add a new layer at the top of the list and pick a bright and saturated red color. Then I'm starting to click on top of the dark red circles, like so. See? Now it really feels like the clouds are still hot. Keep in mind to draw these highlights on the particles as well. Then move into the cloud on the right, and so on. We should draw a bright highlight on top of almost every dark red one, except for the tiniest dots. Let's finish this lower cloud as well. Awesome. The frame looks complete now. So I'm disabling the background layer for a minute and pressing CTRL plus Shift plus Alt plus E to merge the layers, renaming the new frame to Frame 6. And grouping the source layers, let's go the group Frame 6 as well. Excellent. Let's go ahead and draw the frame number 7 right away. On the new frame, the clouds will finally cool down, and there will be no more red highlights. Also, they will start to dissipate, so we need to show that they have become lighter than before. So I'm creating a new layer and picking the lighter gray color that we've used as a highlight on the previous frame. On this frame, it will become the base color instead. Switching to the brush tool and starting to draw smaller clouds overlapping the outer edge of those on the previous frame. Splitting the clouds into smaller pieces like this. This one at the bottom will split into 3 parts, for instance. Defining the next positions for the particles down here. Then proceed into the cloud on the left. Then the one above it, and so on. Feel free to add more tiny dots and particles to make the explosion look richer. And don't forget about any of the existing ones, because we want to show a fluid motion for these little pieces. Adding some details. Okay, I think we're good. Now let's add a new layer to make some highlights. As I said earlier, we won't have any red ones anymore, so instead let's use a much lighter shade of gray. I'm starting from the large cloud here on the left and drawing some circles on top of it. I'm not connecting between most of the shapes to give some volume to the cloud. Moving on to the particles. Drawing the highlights even for the small ones. Going back to the bigger clouds. After these layer of highlights is done, I'll add another one and we'll use a very light gray. By now, you know this process pretty well. So, I'll speed up the video again for your convenience. Okay, as you can see, I finished both layers of highlights, then moved the source layers under a separate group and merged these layers into a single frame. The frame number 7 is finally complete, so let's move on to the next one. On the frame number 8, the clouds will become even smaller and lighter than before, and we're going to use this light gray as a base color this time. Switching back to the brush tool, and start splitting this cloud on the left into 2 smaller ones, then creating a motion for some of the particles. Try not to skip any of them. Then making the central cloud look smaller too. Okay, I'll continue drawing the next positions for the rest of the clouds, and then create the highlights with a lighter gray. Just one layer of highlights this time. The process is pretty much the same as before, so I'll speed up the video for you one last time. Okay, the frame number 8 is ready as well, and we have 2 more frames to draw. Creating a new layer. All right, on the frames number 9 and 10, the clouds start to disappear. The bigger clouds will look more like particles at this point. I'm using the same shades of gray for the base and the highlights as on the previous frame. Splitting the bigger clouds into much smaller pieces, and drawing them farther away from the center than before. Keep in mind to draw the next positions for the particles as well. Make sure you don't skip even the tiny ones. This is going to look great once we'll play the animation. A few last touches. All right, now it's time for the highlights. We're going to have just a single layer of highlights on this frame as well. Also, I'm covering just the larger pieces and particles. It shouldn't take long, because there is not many of them left. Grouping the layers, and calling it frame 9, disabling the background layer, and then merging the visible layers into a new one. Renaming it accordingly. Awesome. Let's proceed to the last frame now. On the frame number 10, the clouds and particles will almost disappear, leaving just a few traces. I won't even add any highlights this time. Using the base gray color, and making a few dozen circles here and there. Okay, this should be enough. Since we've used just a single layer for this frame, I'm going to rename it to frame 10 inches right away. Great. All right, so it seems that we've drawn all of the frames that we needed, and now it's time to test the animation. I'm saving my work in two separate PSD files, one for the source material and one for the final frames. Enabling the visibility for all of the frames, and deleting in the source groups in the frames file. Perfect. Now let's adjust the opacity for the last few frames to make the dissipation look smoother. On the frame number 7, the opacity should be 75%. On the frame number 8, 50%. 25% for the frame number 9. And as for the last frame, 10% only. Excellence. Finally, I'm going to Window and Jeet, Timeline and Jeet, creates frame animation and GT, make frames from layers. Then deleting the frame number 1 from the timeline because it contains the background only, and enabling the background layer for all of the frames at once. Hitting play to see how it looks. Fantastic. The explosion looks powerful and very cartoony, and that's exactly the effect I was looking for. Watch how the color of the clouds gradually changes, suggesting that they cool down and become a smoke. All right, so that's it for the cartoony fire explosion animation. I hope it was fun for you as it was for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.